by striping, or whatever. Said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with a spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot at the thing.
It's July 3rd, 1996. A man is sitting in Pinery Provincial Park on Lake Huron in Ontario, Canada. He has written a 3-page note stating his regrets over his failed marriage and failed business. He eats a peanut butter sandwich, and then he takes his own life. But the story of this man is much more heinous and much darker than anyone could have ever imagined. He was named Herbert Richard Baumeister, known to most simply as Herb. Baumeister was responsible for several disturbing murders that took place across the Midwestern United States, spanning across the mid to late 90s, but he may have also been responsible for a string of murders in the 80s as well. This is the story of Herb Baumeister, one of the most disturbing serial killers in American history.
About the same time, an informant told Indianapolis police that Herb Baumeister was the last one seen with a missing person they were looking for.
By the bones he found yesterday, I believe they found about 75 bones.
Born in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 4, 1947, Baumeister was the eldest of 4 children. His father, Dr. Herbert Eugene Baumeister, was an anesthesiologist, and his mother, Elizabeth, was a stay-at-home mother. Reports indicate that much of Baumeister's childhood was relatively normal. However, at a young age, he began to exhibit antisocial behavior. While he was a student at North Central, teachers would contact Baumeister's parents after he placed a dead crow on a teacher's desk and was blamed for urinating on another teacher's desk. He would also routinely disrupt class with emotional outbursts. As a teenager, his behavior became concerning, and his father would submit Baumeister to undergo mental examinations. He would be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder, but it is not clear if he received psychiatric treatment for the conditions. It is presumed that he did not by most sources, though. Baumeister would return to North Central and for a few years seemed to exhibit socially acceptable behavior. However, many of his fellow students were well aware of what he had done before, and he was mostly to himself. Baumeister would attend Indiana University back in 1965, but only stayed for a semester before dropping out. He co-owned a used hearse with a friend at the time as well. He would return to Indiana University in 1967, and at the time, met a woman named Juliana Sater. The two were members of the Young Republicans, an organization for members of the Republican Party between the ages of 18 and 40. Sater was a high school journalism teacher and part-time student. However, Baumeister left university after one semester again. He would go on to work as a copy boy for the Indianapolis Star and was known as a hard-working but eccentric individual. His patterns of unpredictable behavior continued into the workplace, though. In 1971, Baumeister and Sater would be married. Their marriage would produce 3 children, but in the 25 years that they were married, Sater and Baumeister were almost never intimate. In 1972, he would attend a semester at Butler University. And as an adult, he would jump around jobs. He was described as having a strong work ethic, but his behavior was bizarre. His neighbors in Steinmeier would remember him as being hot-tempered, overly accommodating, and eccentric. He collected coverless magazines to distribute to neighbors, would camp out in front of box offices to purchase concert tickets for himself and younger neighbors, and was quick to anger. In one instance, he would become enraged at some contractors and members of the Homeowners Association when he was told that he could not decorate a newly constructed neighborhood entrance sign with some flower pots. About 6 months into his marriage, his father would have him committed to a psychiatric hospital for a month. Baumeister would begin working at the State Bureau of Motor Vehicles in 1974. While at work, though, he would begin to openly display ideas about gender roles and even sent his colleagues a Christmas card of himself and another man dressed in drag. He would eventually rise to the level of program director, but the BMV had him fired after he peed on a letter to Governor Robert D. Orr and was then found responsible for some urine found months earlier on his manager's desk. Out of work, Baumeister would take up drinking and frequented local gay bars. At some point in September 1985, he would be arrested for a hit and run, and then in March 1986, he was arrested for conspiracy to commit theft. In both cases, though, charges against him were dropped. Baumeister would find a job at a local thrift store, and he found that he had an interest in retail work. He would open his own thrift store known as Save-A-Lots in 1989, after borrowing some money from his mother. The business succeeded in its initial phases, but eventually would fall apart. Baumeister's marriage would subsequently fall apart as well. He moved out of the family home in February 1991 and filed for divorce. However, months later, he and Julie reconciled and, despite their financial troubles, would purchase an 18-acre property known as the Fox Hollow Farm in Westfield, a suburb of Indianapolis, in 1991. The estate was worth $1 million at the time. However, from here, things would begin to take a much darker turn. Between 1992 and 1994, multiple gay men were reported missing from the Midwest. However, the true nature of the number of victims may have stretched back well into the 1980s. In November 1994, Baumeister's 13-year-old son found a human skull on the property of Fox Hollow Farms, and when questioned about it by his family, Baumeister claimed the skull belonged to a collection of medical skulls that his father had maintained. At some point after this, investigators would receive a tip in 1994 about a missing persons case from 1992, where a witness would report seeing a man named Brian Smart leave a gay bar in Indianapolis with a man named Roger Goodlett. The witness was Tony Smith, a friend of Goodlett. In 1995, Smith saw Brian Smart at another bar and would follow him, taking note of his license plate. Investigators would find out that this plate was registered to none other than Herbert Baumeister. Investigators would head to Baumeister's house after identifying him as Brian Smart and informing him that he was a suspect and that they would need to search his house. Both Baumeister and his wife refused, but by June 1996, Julie became frightened by her husband's erratic behavior. She had filed for divorce earlier that year and would then allow investigators to search the estate while Baumeister was on vacation. On June 24, 1996, police would begin the search, and what they found was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. They would find over 10,000 charred and decomposed bones and bone fragments, along with shotgun shells and handcuffs. The University of Indiana's lab would test and catalog the evidence, successfully identifying 4 individuals in the process: Richard Hamilton, Manuel Resendez, Stephen Hale, and Roger Goodlett. Each victim's disappearance coincided with points in time where Baumeister's wife and children were out of town. Police would subsequently issue a warrant for Baumeister's arrest, and he would flee to Ontario, Canada on June 30th, 1996. It was at this point that he would take his own life. He had been planning on apparently taking his own life someplace other than Pinery Provincial Park on Lake Huron, but had seen children in the other area and decided against it. His final meal was a peanut butter sandwich, and he penned a 3-page note talking about how he regretted messing up the park, how he felt bad about his broken marriage and failing business, but made no mention of any of his crimes. Upon searching the property, police would identify only 10 victims, with 3 more still unidentified. All are believed to be male victims of homicide. However, to this day, forensic experts are still working to identify all the victims. One of the victims was recently identified in 2025, a 21 or 22-year-old man named Daniel Thomas Halloran, who had gone missing sometime after March 1994. Another man may have possibly been a victim as well, a 34-year-old Jerry Williams Comer, who had been seen last in Indianapolis on August 8, 1995. His remains were not recovered from the farm, but it fit the profile for Baumeister's victims. But the investigation didn't end with this, and police would eventually theorize a link between Baumeister and the unsolved I-70 Strangler case. To this day, it is not officially known if Baumeister was responsible for being the I-70 Strangler, but the popular theory is that he was. The I-70 Strangler had targeted young boys and younger men at popular gay bars and other similar places within a 4-block radius of Indianapolis. All of the victims would be found near the I-70, often being dumped in rivers, streams, and ditches out in the rural countryside. Each victim had been found strangled. There were 12 officially recorded victims of the I-70 Strangler. The murders took place across both Indiana and the neighboring state of Ohio. The FBI believed that the men had been murdered by a white man around the age of 45 who was overweight and had a high-paying job and was well respected in his community. They eventually concluded that the killer was married but had no intimate relationship with his wife. They would first identify a suspect named Duncan Patterson, a 47-year-old Florida native who was arrested on other charges related to a victim connected to the I-70 Strangler. Patterson denied murdering the victim, claiming that he had seen him go off into another car later. Patterson passed a polygraph, but was convicted on the charges he had been arrested for in the first place. Another man named Gus Kaito was arrested in 1983, but was released after investigators found no evidence linking him to the crimes. Another man, who had been found guilty of committing similar murders, Larry Eiler, was thought to have been the I-70 Strangler, but his confession before his execution on death row would reveal the names of 21 men, none of which were related to the I-70 Strangler. In 1998, an Indianapolis resident contacted the police claiming that Baumeister had been photographed with one of the I-70 Strangler victims. He had also been seen in western Ohio around the same time as the I-70 murders and was known to frequent the Vogue Theater and the Broad Ripple, where victim Michael Riley would be last seen before his disappearance in 1983.
This isolated bridge is a long way from that Broad Ripple night spot where Mickey Riley was last seen. And it's also a long way from where a lot of other young Indianapolis men, like Riley, have met a similar fate.
The photograph seemed to confirm that Baumeister was possibly the one responsible for the I-70 Strangler murders. In relation to the remains on Fox Hollow Farm, investigators believed that Baumeister would wait for his family to go away on trips and would then frequent gay bars, lure the men to his home, and would then kill and bury them on the property. New technology has allowed for a push to open a new investigation into the case. A theory would sprout up over the last few years that Baumeister may have had an accomplice, though this theory has not been proven. It came about after a paranormal filmmaker named Jane Gerlach questioned the story of a man named Mark Anthony Goodyear. Back in 1994, some families of the missing men would hire a private investigator who spoke with Goodyear. Goodyear mentioned that he had met someone named Brian at a bar in the city, and that Brian persuaded Goodyear to accompany him to his home, which had a pool and a bar. They went down to the basement, which Goodyear recalled had mannequins around the pool and behind the bar to create a sort of club-like environment. Goodyear said that he immediately believed that something about Brian was strange and refused to drink what he had been given. He then said that he couldn't remember much after that and would tell people he knew to be on the lookout for a man who fit Brian Smart's description. Gerlach said that she found his stories puzzling. Goodyear spoke to ABC News and told them that he never introduced anyone to Baumeister and that he never set anyone up. It may take years before all of the victims are identified, and to this day, Baumeister has not been convicted of the murders, and an official identification of the I-70 Strangler has never been made.
Baumeister's friends describe him as a man who had nervous tendencies, a fairly explosive temper, and a strange sense of humor.
He was just a major prankster, and with that in mind, he just, anything for a laugh he would do, but on the other side, he was still pretty compassionate too. He didn't want to take him to too far extremes to hurt anybody.
Through the rumors of the grapevine, he is a Vietnam veteran, and he is psychotic.
What do you mean psychotic?
Psychotic in the respect that after a couple of drinks, he seems to go schizoid, schizophrenic, changes his attitudes.
Authorities still believe the bones have been buried in the 18-acre estate for the last 9 to 18 months. Anthropologists say the bones are definitely that of adults. Now, that was likely help law enforcement, but it's not enough.